everyone. I just want to take a quick moment to say thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for all of your support, and thank you because we have hit our initial goal of 500 subscribers. Woo! And I couldn't be more grateful, and I couldn't have done it without you. So now it's time to set a new goal. My new goal is 1,000 subscribers. I know we can do it. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Don't just watch, participate, become a part of this unafraid, unapologetic, always seeking the truth community. Your support helps us keep the content coming and growing and rocking and rolling. Thank you so much for being with us, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Well, welcome to the Janelle King Show. I'm Janelle King, and this is Extra 106.3, and this is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings, but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. And we are welcoming the new year and welcoming 2026 by talking about some topics that are once again kitchen table discussions that are happening privately amongst our families. However, I am bringing it to the main stage because I think it's something that we need to discuss publicly. So today's table topic is intergenerational conflicts in political beliefs. So what do I mean by that? Intergenerational conflicts and political beliefs. We're talking about the fights that's happening right now, quite literally at your kitchen table between your granddaughter and the grandson and grandma and grandpa and mom and dad and then the teenagers and mom and dad against mom and dad. I mean, there's so many different things happening. And I really wanted to dive into this because I believe this is an extremely important topic because it is shaping every single discussion and political movement that we are seeing today. From the reaction to electing our first socialist mayor, to the emotions behind Trump capturing Maduro and his wife, to the desire to replace older elected officials, to the messaging and how do we message to new voters, every aspect of our political landscape is now being shaped by generations and generational conflict and generations that are coming behind us. Generation Z and Alpha is the new wave of politics. They are the ones that's starting to take on some of the leadership roles when it comes to having these conversations. They're not getting elected at an alarming rate, but it's happening and it's inevitable because the fact of the matter is we are all going to die. So as you're getting older, they're going to continue to see this. And I believe that we are seeing some positive gains, such as the number of Gen Z boys who are coming to Christ, who are embracing the traditional life, as well as the millennial women, such as myself, who are yearning to be on the farm, go into the woods and go back into homesteading and farmsteading. So there's some positive things that are happening. But then on the other side of the coin, we're seeing young people who are in support of socialism, those who are marching in the street this past week protesting the arrest of Maduro. I cannot believe that. When I see Americans protesting the arrest of a dictator, we've hit an all-time low. An all-time low of education. So we're going to dive into that a little bit more, but to keep the conversation going, I do believe that the pendulum is clearly swinging back and forth, right? It's either going far to one end or far to the other end, but I never see it land in the middle. What will that look like? And who is equipped to bring the stability this country desperately needs? So before we jump into that, first, I thought it would be fun to share my thoughts as a millennial on some of these hot topics that we're seeing today and some issues overall, because I do think that being able to hear the differences in perspectives play a major role in this. So let's start with what's taking place in Venezuela. So my first thought was that there would be some sort of fireworks or some sort of moment when we do something in my lifetime that I know for a fact is going to go down in the history books. And it was very quiet, actually. We took over another country. I mean, let's let this sink in. What President Trump did was he said, you know what? You are hurting my people. So now we're going to not just investigate you, not just have this bounty of $50 million on your head, not just blow up the ships that you continue to send over here with drugs to harm our people, but I'm going to now drop into your country. I am going to bust down the doors of your home, rip you out of your bed, and bring you back to America so that you can be held accountable for your actions. And he did it while changing absolutely nothing in our American day-to-day life. I mean, that's got to be commendable, right? I mean, we've got to give a round of applause for that. It's commendable.
In a daring operation in the pre-dawn hours in 2 a.m. local in Caracas, 1 a.m. East Coast time, U.S. Special Operations Forces flew in from off the coast of Venezuela to snatch Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro and his wife. President Trump announcing the news on Truth Social a short time ago. I'll read it for our viewers. It says, quote, "The United States of America has successfully carried out a large-scale strike against Venezuela and its leader, President Nicolas Maduro, who has been, along with his wife, captured and flown out of the country. This operation was done in conjunction with U.S. law enforcement. Details to follow. There will be a news conference today at 11 a.m. at Mar-a-Lago. Thank you for your attention to this matter. President Donald J. Trump." And just before the assault force arrived at Maduro's compound, you can imagine the intelligence that U.S. intelligence agency had to have to know where to send the assault force to be able to locate and grab Maduro as well as his wife. You had numerous airstrikes throughout Caracas targeting Maduro's forces at a military base in Caracas as well as an air base, also Venezuela's largest port. And this is something President Trump has been threatening for months. It started with the drone strikes on the alleged drug boats in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific, over 2 dozen to date, killing over 100 people. You saw it when U.S. forces seized, as a law enforcement matter, the oil tankers that the Trump administration said were associated with the Maduro regime. The goal is to cut off the drug and oil revenue stream for Nicolas Maduro. And for months, we've heard President Trump say that Maduro must go. And Maduro was very defiant. Despite repeated threats from President Trump, over 15 times, President Trump said he will be striking.
What do you think of the capture? It's about time. I mean, ever since the 80s, when I was born in 84, we have had an epidemic when it came to drugs. We've seen the war on drugs happen 50 million times over. And if you allow the Democrats to do the war on drugs, you know what they do? They put strikes on the citizens. The people who are using the drugs are punished. That's what we have seen. That has been the war on drugs. We hadn't had a leader who had the bravos or the kahunas to actually go and attack the kingpin. Instead, we were putting more and increasing more consequences on the people who are using the drugs. And many of us know children who had parents who fell prey to the drug epidemic. I mean, after a tragic loss, my father-in-law found himself caught up in the 80s drug world. And thank God he has since, changed his life around, and we're so grateful for that. But it led to some catastrophic outcomes for him that resulted in him losing years with his son, Kelvin. But that's not unusual. We hear these stories over and over and over again. And if you are in the Gen Xer or the Boomer generation, then you have a much clearer picture on the impact of the 80s crisis. Not so much for the Gen Zers or myself, the millennials, because we were the children during that era. But there were a lot of Gen Xers who were young adults, who were older children, and we have Boomers who were adults who were really living it. When I look around as a millennial who was born in 1984, and I see the devastation that has occurred due to drugs, specifically cocaine, crack, and now fentanyl, when I consider the fact that 1.3 million lives have been impacted by fentanyl overdoses and drug-related injuries within the last few years, I feel you have to turn a blind eye or even be complicit if you are upset with Trump and what he has done. And I totally agree with the masses. If Trump had tipped off Congress and Senate about his move, it would have been coming out on Rachel Maddow's mouth. It would have been coming out of the Democrats' mouth. It would have been everywhere in a matter of seconds. And some may have tipped the president, Maduro, off to avoid capture. Who knows? But whatever the Dems want to believe or not believe, majority of America know that the Democrats hate Trump. And we also know that they wouldn't help him in any way. In fact, they would probably sabotage him. So they can cry all day about overreach and all this other stuff, but we have gone past that. We're at a point now where we've got to make things happen. And if they don't like it, then they can impeach him, which is, thanks to them, it's been overused and it's been a tool that they have just completely ran to the ground, so nobody cares. So if they try to impeach him, whatever. What are you going to do? Impeach him over getting rid of a dictator? But okay. As a millennial, I understand the move. I think it was a good move, but I want to see more, particularly on our soil. I want to see the government do something about this opioid abuse. And I know RFK is in there and I'm watching him very closely. He has made some good strides, but I want to see that, starting with makers of these super strong, highly addictive painkillers that is running through our rural communities worse than meth. It is my desire that this is just the beginning, that we go further. And here's another one: election fraud. So another hot topic. We've all heard about the 315,000 ballots that was tabulated and counted in the 2020 election, although the county cannot tell us who tabulated them and if there were old ballots counted due to the fact that there was no opening tapes and there was no signed tabulator tapes. Well, as a state election board member, I can give you the backstory on how we got there and give it to you in great detail. So let me explain the Fulton drama really quickly, and then I'm going to give you my thoughts on it as a millennial. So, all right. So the board itself it's 5 of us. We're all appointed, even though there's the state code calls for us to be voted in. However, when we're out of session, we're appointed by several different people. So now so just giving you what happened, not necessarily what could happen if we were elected or voted on in the House and the Senate. However, this is where we are. So I was appointed by the Speaker of the House. We have Sally Grubbs, who's our new board member. Rick Jeffries was on in December, but Sally Grubbs was appointed by the Lieutenant Governor. Then you have our chairman, John Fervier, who was appointed by our governor. And then you have 2 appointments, Dr. Jan and Member Ghazal. Dr. Jan appointed by the Republican Party, Sarah Ghazal appointed by the Democrat Party. So that makes up a 5-person board. Prior to this last meeting, all of our cases that was brought to us, because the board's responsibility, or one of our responsibility, is to hear cases of potential election fraud and to determine if that is actual election fraud, if the violation that they presented is something that constitutes either a letter of instruction, a letter of reprimand, a fine, or sending it to the Attorney General's office or the local DA's office. That is what we are supposed to do. Once it goes to the Attorney General's office, they are the ones who issue like the sentencing, so to speak, right? So just look at us as those who indict, and the AG's office as those who sentence. Just kind of look at it like that, right? That being said, all of these cases were brought to us, and they were brought to us from the Secretary of State's office. So the complaints went into the Secretary of State's office. The complaints were investigated by the Secretary of State's office. And then these complaints and cases were now presented to the State Election Board by the Secretary of State's office. Well, Mark Nisi, a former AJC writer, decided to do an article where he said that we had a huge number of backlog cases. As a result of that, it led to us wondering, well, what are these backlog cases? See, where Mark Nisi messed up is that he didn't know that we, the board members, didn't know about the backlog of cases because we weren't being presented them. The question was posed, How do you know that we have this huge backlog of cases? Well, he admitted that he got it from our chairman and that he got it from the Secretary of State's office. Well, that backfired on him because as a result, we then said, well, how about this to the investigators? Give us all the cases and we will determine which cases are heard. We will determine which cases are going to be presented during our board meetings. And what we discovered when we obtained those cases is that there were several cases like the one that's in question now, with the 315,000 ballots. We realized that that case was being held. It had already been investigated. It had already been determined that their violations have been made in 2021, but they didn't present it to us at all. And I don't know if they were going to. So eventually we got it. We decided to hear the case, and that's how it became public. So during the board meeting, we ended up hearing from David Cross. David Cross then presented, because he was the one who brought the complaint. He then showed that out of the 37 tabulator tapes he was provided, although he asked for all of them, some are missing. But out of the ones he was provided, out of the 37, 36 were not signed. So that was a concern. That being said, we decided as a board to send it to the Attorney General's office as well as the District Attorney's office, and we notified the DOJ, and we suggested that a fine in the amount of $5,000 per infraction be assigned to Fulton County. So as a result, we that was that. However, it also shows why the subpoena that we issued still stands. We issued a subpoena for records from Fulton County. These records will be able to help us to prove that even though there were these irregularities and these mistakes, quote unquote, then, we have the proof by looking at the ballots, doing our own audit of what is the written text on these ballots. We can now prove that nothing affected the outcome of the election. So it's about restoring faith in the process.
Mission about the 2020 election. After almost 5 years of assuring voters all procedures were followed, it turns out that may not be entirely true. Now they face some steep fines from the State Elections Board.
And those fines could crest $1 million if the State Elections Board gets exactly what they're asking for. Fulton County essentially admitted that there were unsigned tabulator tapes. Those are those pieces of paper akin to receipts that come out of the voting tabulation machines that help them verify how many people voted and to make sure that it actually matches the number of votes that were cast. Those are unsigned, and that violates state law. The board also admitted that they were missing some documents tied to 2020.
But it's a violation of a rule. They should have done it.
A stunning admission earlier this month from an attorney representing Fulton County's election board.
The tapes that are an issue in this case have been produced. They just weren't signed.
The ticker tapes she's talking about, shown here, are almost like receipts spit out by voting tabulators on election night. State law says they must be signed by poll workers for verification, but some 150 tapes tracking the votes of some 315,000 people during early voting in 2020 weren't signed.
At best, this is sloppy and it's lazy. At worst, it could be egregious, and it could have affected an election.
Some other ticker tapes and documents tied to the 2020 election were also missing, the county said. The revelation made waves nationally. Even Elon Musk posted about it. Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger assured it wouldn't have altered the results of the election that was audited and verified several times over. Raffensperger posting online, quote, "A clerical error at the end of the day does not erase valid legal votes."
A clerical error could be one tabulator tape not signed or one tabulator tape missing, not 148 tabulator tapes missing.
Garland Favorito, who runs the conservative watchdog group Voter GA, said the admission is disturbing to people who've had doubts about the 2020 election for years.
It's not vindication. It's just about accuracy and the integrity and security of future elections.
And that wasn't it for Fulton County this month. Just last Friday, a judge down the hill here ruled that they have to turn over images of ballots from 2020. It was something they had been fighting the State Elections Board on for well over a year.
People lie, and people will cheat. So if given the opportunity, there are very few people who would not lie and cheat if it meant losing their livelihoods. Not having enough to pay your child's tuition, not having enough to live in the house on the golf course, or getting invited to the hot parties are all reasons why people sometimes lie. There are very few people who say that they will not accept these perks if offered to them. It's just human nature. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just human nature. So this is why we have checks and balances. This is why we have processes and procedures. This is why we have laws. And in the case of Fulton County, many of the chain of custody rules were broken. And as a result, we are now without faith in our election process. But my husband plans to fix that, so check him out. I did do an interview with him talking about his race for Secretary of State. I do believe that America will be a well-dressed third world country if we, the people, in all caps, do not step up and take our job more seriously. We are still working it. Our subpoena still stands. I will keep you guys posted. I will come here and correct the record. And I can do that being on the inside. Now that we've addressed those hot topics, after the break, I'm going to jump into our topic, intergenerational conflicts and political belief. We're going to jump into it face first, so you don't want to miss it. We're just getting started. Don't leave the table. Well, welcome back. Welcome back to the Janelle King Show. I'm Janelle King. This is Extra 106.3, and this is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings, but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. And today's table topic is intergenerational conflicts in political beliefs. You know, when I mentor and I speak to our young people, there's no doubt in my mind that we are at a crisis. Our young people are more medicated than ever. They are more depressed than ever. They feel hopelessness. A lot of them are not looking forward to marriage and a family. So they feel that they're going to be lonely for the majority of their lives. They are resisting the idea of having children. They believe that the world is selfish and that there isn't a collective mindset. And without understanding what collectivism is, they speak of it as if it isn't something that's directly connected to communism.
For too long, those fluent in the good grammar of civility have deployed decorum to mask agendas of cruelty. Many of these people have been betrayed by the established order. But in our administration, their needs will be met. Their hopes and dreams and interests will be reflected transparently in government. They will shape our future. And if for too long these communities have existed as distinct from one another, we will draw this city closer together. We will replace the frigidity of rugged individualism with the warmth of collectivism.
So what you just heard was a portion of the speech from our new mayor of New York City, Zohran Mamdani, who gave us his inauguration speech where he referred to individualism as rigid, and that collectivism was warmth. I mean, can you believe it? And here's the thing. The biggest misconception that I see happening between the generations is that you have a middle to older generation that feels as though the government's responsibility is not to take care of the people. It's to ensure that there are not barriers for the people to be able to take care of themselves. Whereas you have a middle to younger generation that feels that the government is responsible for taking care of the people, not just eliminating barriers for the people to take care of themselves, but there is a responsibility of the government to take care of the people. That is the fundamental difference, and that is a problem. They have no understanding of our history, or at least not accurately. They throw their own emotions and their perspectives on history, and then they determine that that's how we all should see it today, and how we should all feel and what we should all believe. They have a hard time taking accountability and they struggle with social connecting and social skills. And the list can go on and on and on and on and on. And I am deeply concerned, not so much with the problem at hand. I'm concerned about how we are going to handle it. Because the problem at hand is not abnormal. I'm concerned about whether or not we're ignoring some things that we should be facing, or if we're just simply criticizing everything and just being complaint artists. We don't have a lot of solutions, and we're not hearing the problems. And that's causing this generation to reject everything that we have once stood for. And I'm speaking of us not addressing core issues that are important to the younger generation, like healthcare, housing and affordability, student loan debt, and educational options. Why the Republican Party has not addressed healthcare is beyond me. I'm tired of getting bills in the mail telling me that I owe X amount of dollars. I have no understanding as to why I owe this money. But then if I pay it, the next thing you know, 2 months later, 2 weeks later, I'm here with another check that says, oh, we thank you for paying that. We forgot to add this portion to it. And now I got to pay again. Everybody knows that healthcare and our healthcare process is screwed up. But yet we're acting as if it's not that big of a deal. It is. And these are the things that are on the heart of our young people. And while I'm a millennial, I am on the older end of the millennial spectrum because I'm in my 40s and things are a little bit different rather than from when I was in my 20s. However, when I look at these issues that I had in my 20s versus the concerns that I have now, while they are not the same, we cannot downplay the things that are impacting our young people. Because if we do, we're going to continue to push them in the direction of socialism because it's the only option politically that seems like there is some reprieve. Our young people ages 18 to 35 have begun to embrace collectivism. You see, socialism, especially for those 18 to 35, really poses some serious problems. And I plan to highlight how socialism and communism is going to impact young people specifically. Because if we just look at it from a grand scale, they kind of wiggle their way out of it, or they'll say things like, oh, well, that's not the socialism that I'm talking about. But in fact, it is. In order for socialism and communism to work, you have to follow a certain blueprint. And that blueprint is being followed. But however, we have young people who think that while we follow the blueprint, we're going to get a different outcome. So we have Gen Zers and Alphas who are among some of our most creative. They love their individuality, from their hair color to their style of clothing to just their vibe and all the other stuff and the words that they're making up and the terminology that they utilize. They love that freedom. But take Venezuela, for example. It used to be one of the richest countries in South America, but under socialism, they face economic collapse. And I heard someone say that they watched their country collapse in slow motion. And that really stood out to me because that is the concern. Are we watching a collapse in slow motion when it comes to America? And that collapse that they were watching in Venezuela in slow motion opened up the country to be taken over by the cartel. The government's control over industry, they crushed entrepreneurship and scared off investors, which led to widespread poverty and high unemployment. We're seeing that happening right now in New York. The investors are being ran off. For young people hoping for this bright future in Venezuela, it was a total disaster. And it came with heavy regulations on the free market, heavy regulations on creativity, and individual effort took a nosedive. And then now let's look at Cuba, because Cuba's now entering the chat, and Cuba's not much better. The government has tightened its grip on many aspects of life, from jobs to healthcare, and that really curtailed personal choice. For those looking to start their own ventures or express themselves creatively, the barriers were just too high. It killed it. And because of that, their economy is stagnated. And innovation is dead. And their talents just ended up going to waste. And then you have the Soviet Union, where the whole push for collectivism led to massive human suffering, with the government controlling everything. There was little to no room for personal initiative, which led to inefficiencies and shortages. Young people who wanted to make a real impact found their ambitions crushed under bureaucratic control. And what's even more frustrating is how socialism often creates this culture of mediocrity. And everyone gets treated the same. There's not much motivation to excel. Why would I work extra hard for nothing? This promise of equality can lead to equal frustration, where growth is stalled and potential is absolutely wasted. Individuality is super important for personal growth. It's super important for the sustaining and a growing economy. And while the free market has its ups and downs, pun intended, it also encourages competition and self-expression. I went to a friend's house this weekend, and there was a lady there who was from Romania, and she said, I've stood in bread lines. I've stood in the food lines. She said, when I came to America, I walked into the grocery store and I felt like a kid in the candy shop. I couldn't believe it. She was like, I went off in that grocery store. Like, I bought a bunch of stuff, a bunch of everything. She said it was just like the best experience ever. Think about it. We walk into our grocery stores, and if we don't see food on the shelves, we're like, what's happening? Where's the food? Why is this empty? There's never a thought of like, oh, maybe we couldn't afford it, or maybe it's being stifled, or maybe we're not getting it. It's not being shipped in because of communism or socialism or whatever. That never even crosses our brain, our minds. But for other people, they're like, man, I am in love with these open grocery stores, these full grocery stores. But this isn't the first time communism has shown up in America. But it's certainly the most prominent that I've seen in my lifetime. And it always targets our young people first. And for obvious reasons, because young people are impressionable and it's easy to sell a dream because they are less jaded. But while we understand why our young people are targeted, I want to understand why the messaging seems to work. Because being targeted towards something is not necessarily the problem. The problem is when you take what's being targeted at you, and now you make it your belief system. You hold true to it. You reject what you've always known for it. Why is this working on our young people? And it's because socialism often resonates more with young people than older folks for a few reasons. Well, for many in their 20s and 30s, they're still trying to figure out their place in the world. Young people tend to have this idealistic view and belief that a collective approach can lead to a more just society, especially after seeing the challenges like student loan debt and job scarcity. And let's talk about that for a second, right? Because they're 100% correct. If people had a more collective approach, then yeah, we could have a more a helpful, accepting society. But the problem our young people have that they're going to learn over time, because it really happens the older you get. And it sounds very crazy and it sounds very bizarre, but it's this notion where you start to realize as you get older that you can't control people and that human nature cannot be modified. But everyone has that idealistic view of like, I'm here, I'm going to make the world better. And that is what we are seeing from our young people. And ultimately is driven by fear and is received through fear. It feels like this fresh way of solving problems or addressing the issues that have not been addressed by those who we elected to address them. And there's that sense of wanting to challenge the status quo. And then on the flip side, you have the older generations having lived through different economic conditions and the failures of socialist systems in places like Venezuela or Cuba, who are often more cautious about the potential downsides because they've seen it. They've seen how promises of equality can lead to a disaster, how it muffles individual effort. So they tend to be more on the skeptical side, skeptical about the feasibility of socialist ideas. They know that while the intent might be good, the reality can be vastly different, leading to a lack of incentives and personal growth. And they know this because they've seen it. So how do we turn this around? Does the fall of Venezuela have an impact? And will we once again defeat communism in America? Well, we'll address these questions right after the break. We're almost finished. Don't leave the table. You're listening to the Janelle King Show right here on Extra 106.3. We'll be right back.
Hello, everyone. My name is Suzanne Guy, and this is the Church's Moment. There is an incredible opportunity to start a distinct pro-life ministry at your church. We started one at our church about 5 years ago, and the fruit has been tangibly beautiful. We do monthly meetings that educate and equip the body of believers on sanctity of human life issues from womb to tomb by bringing in and featuring different pro-life leaders from all over Georgia, as well as featuring different ministries like post-abortion healing ministries or foster care ministries. There are so many great community partners out there. And then the second part of this pro-life ministry is having a care team. This is an opportunity to show moms in crisis, moms in unplanned, unwanted, or crisis pregnancies that the church is the place to run to, that the church is a safe haven and a place to go for tangible help, real hope, true compassion, friendship, and discipleship. And yes, an opportunity to share the gospel in both word and deed. Brothers and sisters in Christ, will you consider starting a distinct pro-life ministry at your church? It's so easy. Please contact me today to find out how simple this is. You can contact me at my email, proverbs318@att.net. This is the Church's Moment.
Welcome back. Welcome back to the Janelle King Show. I'm Janelle King. This is Extra 106.3, and this is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings, but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. And today's table topic, intergenerational conflicts in political beliefs. Doesn't that sound very high end, very high level? What it really means is the fights you're having at the table with your kids, if you're a mom and dad, or the arguments that grandma and grandpa are having with their grandchildren about politics. That's what we're talking about. Is why is this conflict here? Why do we feel like our young people are being targeted, and why has it taken effect or taken hold of them? And as we close our discussion, we've talked a lot about this, from the Maduro arrest and to why our young people are being targeted, and why it appears to work on them. You know, as we stated before, we've kind of talked about that, and why we should be alarmed by the words of the New York Mayor Mandani, who is pushing for collectivism and saying, let's do away with individuality. So I wanted to close the show by discussing what our next steps should be to pull our young people back from this threat that will hurt them more so than others, way more than those who are older. Because the world that they are advocating for is a world that they are creating for their offspring, for themselves. And turning things around and re-engaging our young people in this political landscape starts with finding significant ways to involve them in the conservative values and in conservative values and discussions. One effective approach is to encourage younger generations to open up and understand their families' perspectives on politics. Emphasis on perspective. I don't know why it feels like our younger generation doesn't understand what the word perspective means, because they almost act as if you say you want to share your perspective, they act as if that means I want to now put my perspective on you. The fact of the matter is, you don't have to agree with your family or your family members to hear their perspective. And to use a term our young people use, to acknowledge their lived experiences. because family discussions can be a great entry point into highlighting what is and what has been, creating this environment where there's constructive political conversations that can flourish. Initiatives like mentorship programs, holding forums and community discussions and educational outreach efforts, such as what we're seeing from Turning Point and the Young Republicans. Shout out to the Atlanta Young Republicans who are doing a great job with this, and all these other organizations that are on and off campus. They can be really impactful. I remember Kelvin and I was at Mercer College and we spoke to the Mercer Republicans, and one of the things they said to us that we still use to this day is that they say meritocracy is diversity. And then when they said that to me, I was like, went to Kelvin, I was just thinking, wow. And it impacted both of us. And this came from a younger generation to an older generation. And it made a lot of sense. So having these on-campus discussions and having these organizations is very important. It's vital. I also would like to see our history classes teach real history and not those rose-colored version of history, hitting all the hot topics, the good, the bad, and the ugly, without adding in parameters that protect feelings. I want to see a promotion of civic engagement amongst our youth, making them more likely to connect and be connected to our political process. And this is where all of us, the older crowd, where we have to also make some adjustments, and we need to be what we expect from our youth. We need to have the conversations with our youth judgment free that we expect from them, and be willing to embrace change that makes sense. You see, as conservatives, it's essential to engage with our younger generations by acknowledging generational differences and the sources of the conflict that may arise. Whether you are a fan of Turning Point and Charlie Kirk or not, you have to acknowledge the fact that he single-handedly grew the tent on the Republican side, and he did it through values. It was very smart. But by approaching political discussions with a genuine desire to understand and a willingness to hear perspectives, we can share our conservative values in ways that resonate and leads to lasting results. I always say, we are sowing seeds. We're not knocking down trees. And sometimes you are just the water in the process, and someone else is going to bring the sunshine. Be okay with not being the master of conversion when it comes to speaking to people. You may not win them over in that one conversation. Matter of fact, it's not even realistic. Got to give them time to process what you're saying. But over time, as you live it, as you see things and you say, see, this is why. Over time, it will lead to conversion, but it may not be single-handedly at the hands of you. Here's another thing to my young people. We've got to drop the dangerous actions like cutting people off who has a difference of opinions. I'm not saying not to cut someone off who's harming you, but if you're cutting people off simply because they voted for Trump, or if you're cutting family members off because they disagree with you, that's not good. And it actually hurts you more than it hurts the person you're cutting off. Because now you are releasing yourself from additional perspective. So now you're getting increasingly more boxed in. You're getting more nestled into an echo chamber. Nothing good or growth certainly doesn't come out of that. And let's toss this idea, this happiness theory, and this idea that we're all supposed to live and be happy. Let's live in reality, because the reality is that we're not supposed to be happy. We are supposed to have the right to pursue happiness. Hug your grandkids, hug your grandma and your grandparents, hug your parents, sit down, battle it out. One thing I appreciate the most growing up is that in my household, my mom wasn't the mom that just allowed us to have a say-so. She wasn't the mom that said, oh, we're going to just make sure everybody gets to talk. No. She was the mom that said, I know there's disagreement here. Let's all get in this living room and let's debate it out. And that's why I'm the way I am. I've learned to defend my perspective, but I've also learned how to accept the fact that not everyone may agree. And I also have learned that even though there may be disagreement, it doesn't mean that they don't see your perspective. It's very nuanced. Until next time, stay unafraid, stay unapologetic, and never stop seeking the truth.